A racist flight attendant poured scalding candle wax onto a black teen mid-flight, but just a minute later, he faced a consequence he never saw coming. What happens next will leave you speechless. He poured hot wax onto a child, thinking his uniform made him untouchable. Subscribe if you believe no one is above the law. The boarding gate was crowded with restless travelers when the tension first revealed itself. Desmond Rowan, carrying a leather satchel over one shoulder and keeping a firm hand on his son's back, moved steadily through the narrow jet bridge. His eyes scanned the rows of passengers already seated, noting the hum of conversations, the squeak of luggage wheels, and the faint scent of lemon polish that clung to the cabin walls. Malik, 12 years old and clutching a small toy airplane, tugged lightly at his father's sleeve, his face glowing with excitement. "Do you think we'll see the river from the window, Dad?" he asked in a hushed tone, his voice trembling with a mixture of eagerness and shyness. Desmond smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried quiet strength rather than outward cheer. "If the clouds allow us," he answered, lowering his voice so only Malik could hear. He guided his son into their assigned seats near the middle of the cabin. As they settled in, Desmond's gaze shifted toward the aisle, where a tall flight attendant stood rigidly, arms crossed behind his back. Gregory Vale, with his sharply angled face and expressionless eyes, did not offer the welcoming warmth expected of his role. Instead, when Desmond gave a polite nod and said, "Good evening," Gregory returned only a curt acknowledgement, barely a sound, more of a dismissal than a greeting. The chill in that exchange struck Desmond like a faint but undeniable warning. He brushed it aside at first, telling himself that perhaps the man was tired or burdened by routine. Still, the flicker of disdain in Gregory's eyes lingered longer than Desmond wished to admit. Malik, oblivious, pressed his toy plane against the window, whispering takeoff noises to himself. His small voice and bright imagination filled the ordinary cabin with life, transforming dull gray seats and overhead bins into the landscape of adventure. Gregory's gaze, however, did not soften. He lingered near their row, pretending to check a seatbelt while muttering something beneath his breath. Desmond's ears caught only fragments, a low, bitter tone, the shape of words he could not fully hear. It was not what Gregory said, but the weight of how he said it, dripping with irritation and unspoken contempt. Desmond felt his chest tighten, though he remained still, unwilling to confront what might simply be a passing slight. Around them, other passengers exchanged casual pleasantries with the crew. Smiles were met with smiles, laughter met with practiced warmth. Yet whenever Gregory's eyes flickered back toward Malik, there was something sharper, a look that felt more like judgment than watchfulness. Desmond noticed but chose silence, clinging to his objective with quiet determination, to protect his son, to reach Eastvale safely, and to prove through his work that a man like him could stand in places where others believed he did not belong. Malik's enthusiasm painted the scene in brighter tones. "Look, Dad," he whispered, holding the toy high as though it soared through invisible skies. "It's just like this plane." His eyes gleamed with innocence and wonder. Desmond squeezed his shoulder gently, a gesture of reassurance, his voice steady. "Keep it safe. You'll need it when we reach the exhibition." From the corner of his eye, Desmond caught Gregory watching again, lips pressed thin, the faintest smirk tugging at one corner of his mouth before vanishing. The man shifted away with an exaggerated air of indifference, though his movements were too deliberate to be casual. Dramatic irony hung heavy in the air, while Malik dreamed of skies and rivers. A darker storm brewed quietly within the narrow aisles of the plane. The captain's voice echoed through the speakers announcing the flight to Eastvale. Passengers adjusted their belongings, seatbelts clicked in unison. Desmond leaned back, but his muscles remained tense, his instincts quietly on guard. The ordinary had begun to feel less certain, as though a shadow moved beneath the calm surface of the journey. He turned once more to Malik, watching the boy's small fingers trace the outline of the toy's wings, and told himself that no matter what unfolded, he would shield his son from harm. Unseen by most, Gregory paused at the galley before the cabin lights dimmed, his gaze cutting once more toward row 17. He muttered again, this time with words sharper though still muffled by the distance. Desmond could not catch them, yet his heart caught their meaning all the same. It was not fatigue that fueled the attendant's demeanor, nor mere impatience. It was something deeper, something hostile, something that would not stay buried for long. And though Desmond chose silence for now, his instincts whispered a truth he could not ignore. What seemed like an ordinary flight held seeds of cruelty no one yet suspected. Sometimes storms begin with the smallest winds. Gregory's jaw tightened the instant Malik's plastic cup tipped and a thin stream of juice trickled across the tray table. The sticky liquid spread quickly, dripping toward the edge. The boy gasped, fumbling with napkins, his small hands clumsy in the tight space. Gregory leaned in sharply, his shadow falling across them, and his voice cut through the low hum of the engines like a blade. "Control your child." The words landed harder than the spill itself. Desmond looked up, meeting the attendant's cold, unblinking eyes. For a brief second he considered standing, matching sharpness with sharpness, but instead he reached calmly for a napkin, blotting at the spill. "I'm sorry," he said evenly, his voice carrying the steady patience of a man who had weathered many storms. Gregory didn't respond. He spun on his heel, muttering as he strode away, his words just loud enough for the nearest rows to hear. "Troublemakers, always demanding special treatment." Passengers glanced over, curiosity flickering in their eyes, but none spoke. Some shifted uncomfortably, returning to their magazines and tablets, eager to avoid involvement. Malik lowered his gaze, his cheeks flushed with shame. His lip trembled and his eyes filled with tears he tried to blink back. Desmond placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder, leaning close so only he could hear. "Remember, Malik," he whispered, his tone low and reassuring. "Dignity often means silence until the right moment." Malik nodded faintly, swallowing hard, though his fingers still trembled as they clutched the toy plane resting on his lap. From the galley door, Jordan Mace watched. He was young, perhaps only a few years into the job, his uniform still crisp from less wear, but his face betrayed his unease. Jordan's eyes followed Gregory, noting the stiffness in his stride, the way his shoulders rolled back as if preparing for another strike. He hesitated, torn between speaking up and remaining silent, but chose the latter, the weight of inexperience pressing down on his chest. Minutes later, as service resumed, Jordan noticed something more unsettling. Gregory moved deliberately down the aisle with the snack cart, smiling politely at passengers, offering small packets and drinks. But when he reached Malik's row, his gaze swept over the boy as if he were invisible. Malik raised his hand timidly, almost afraid to speak, but Gregory pushed the cart forward without pausing. Malik's small voice broke through the rumble of the engines. "Excuse me, sir. Could I have one too?" The attendant did not turn. His steps carried him onward, the wheels of the cart rattling like the cold answer he refused to give. Desmond leaned back slowly in his seat, jaw tightening, but he did not call after him. He studied Gregory instead, memorizing every slight, every deliberate omission. His instincts urged restraint, but deep inside he recognized this was more than an irritated employee. It was a man building a case of hostility piece by piece. Jordan, watching from a few rows back, felt his stomach twist. He scribbled something quickly on a service notepad, a tiny mark to remind himself later. It was his quiet rebellion, though he knew it might never see the light of day. The cabin settled into a hush, but for Desmond and Malik, the silence was heavy, stretched tight like a rope ready to snap. Desmond wrestled with his thoughts. Should he report Gregory the moment they landed? Should he confront him now and risk escalation in front of his son? His eyes traveled over Malik, who sat quietly, shoulders drawn in as though trying to disappear. The boy's earlier excitement about the flight had drained away, replaced by a tense awareness beyond his years. Desmond's instincts whispered caution. There was danger here, not in spilled juice or missed snacks, but in the simmering malice behind Gregory's every action. A storm was gathering, though its form was not yet clear. And as Malik leaned closer, resting against his father's arm, the boy's world had shifted. The adventure he once dreamed about, the wonder of flight, the thrill of new horizons, had been replaced by something darker. For him, the journey was no longer about seeing the city's riverfront or watching the clouds pass below. It had become a test of patience, of endurance against an enemy disguised in uniform. The engines roared steadily, the seatbelt lights flickered faintly overhead, and passengers chatted softly, unaware of the undercurrent running through row 14. Only Desmond, Malik, and the silent witness Jordan could sense it. This flight was no longer ordinary. The air felt calm, but danger was pacing just beyond sight. The candle tipped. Hot, molten wax spilled in a shimmering arc, droplets scattering like sparks across the narrow aisle before landing on Malik's exposed arm and cheek. The boy's scream tore through the cabin, high-pitched and raw, a sound that jolted passengers from their calm silence. His small hands shot up instinctively, clawing at his burning skin as his hair stuck together in clumps, singed and smoking from the sudden sear. The dimmed cabin lights flickered faintly in turbulence, and the soft hum of engines was drowned beneath gasps and shouts. Desmond Rowan was out of his seat in an instant. His chair clattered back against the row behind him as he lunged toward his son. "Malik!" His voice cracked with a mix of panic and fury, his large hands fumbling for napkins, desperate to wipe away the wax that clung stubbornly to blistering skin. The acrid smell of burned hair filled the air, sharp and nauseating, and Desmond's chest tightened as he tried to steady his shaking hands. Gregory Vale stood above them, still clutching the dripping candle holder. His sharp features were frozen into something between satisfaction and feigned innocence. "It was an accident," he sneered, his tone clipped, each word carrying a thin layer of mock concern that fooled no one. "The boy shouldn't have been moving about." Passengers who had witnessed the moment erupted with disbelief. A man in row 9 shot to his feet, his voice cutting through the chaos. "That wasn't an accident. I saw you tip it," others murmured, some raising their phones with trembling hands, recording the scene as though instinct demanded proof in case truth was denied later. Malik's cries softened into ragged sobs, his face buried against Desmond's sleeve as his father pressed cold napkins to the burns. Tears streaked down the boy's cheeks, mixing with wax that had hardened into cruel patches on his reddened skin. Desmond's jaw clenched, fury trembling beneath the surface, but he forced his voice into calm clarity. "You will not blame my son for this," he said, his eyes locked on Gregory with steel. His tone was low but dangerous, the voice of a man who would not let harm slip into silence. Gregory's lip curled. "Perhaps, if you controlled him—" "Enough!" Desmond's voice thundered, drawing every pair of eyes in the cabin. He pressed a trembling hand to Malik's shoulder, grounding himself through the touch, refusing to let rage strip him of composure. His other hand worked furiously with napkins, though he knew the burns needed more than improvised care. Jordan Mace, the younger attendant who had been watching from the galley, froze at first in paralyzed shock. His tray rattled against the counter as his hands trembled, his mind caught between duty and fear. Then, breaking through hesitation, he rushed forward with a bottle of water, his voice uncertain but urgent. "Here, pour it over his arm, quickly." Desmond looked up, their eyes meeting briefly, a silent acknowledgement of shared urgency. He took the bottle, pouring the cool liquid over Malik's reddened skin. The boy whimpered but clutched tighter to his father, whispering broken pleas. "It hurts, Dad. It hurts." "I know, son. I know. I'm here," Desmond murmured, his voice a rough whisper thick with restrained grief. He wanted nothing more than to cradle Malik safe from the world, but the harsh truth stood inches away, smug and unrepentant. Gregory, seeing the cabin united against him, attempted to reframe the narrative, his voice rising above the din. "It was turbulence. The boy leaned too far and the candle slipped. These passengers don't understand the dangers of distraction." His words rang hollow, but the certainty with which he spoke sowed a moment of hesitation in the crowd. A murmur of doubt rippled until a middle-aged man near the aisle shouted back, "We all saw you. Don't lie." The passengers' outrage swelled, the quiet power of witnesses becoming a storm Gregory could not so easily dismiss. Yet Gregory's smirk lingered, his eyes flicking to Desmond with venomous disdain. He believed he could twist facts, bend truth beneath the weight of authority and uniform. The arrogance clung to him like armor, even as phones continued to record, lenses glinting in the dim cabin light. Dramatic irony thickened the air. Gregory, blinded by his own self-assurance, seemed unaware of how many silent eyes had caught his cruelty, unaware, too, that the very technology he scorned was weaving a net around him, each recorded second a chain that would bind his falsehoods. Desmond's thoughts spun furiously as he pressed fresh napkins to Malik's cheek, the boy's skin angry red beneath his trembling fingers. He wanted to shout, to seize Gregory by the collar and demand justice then and there, but instinct whispered caution. Malik needed calm, not chaos. Strength meant waiting for the right moment to strike, not letting fury make him reckless. Jordan, still pale, crouched beside Malik, whispering softly though his voice shook. "Hold on, little man. You'll be okay. We'll take care of this." His attempt at comfort trembled with guilt. He had seen Gregory's hostility building earlier, yet he had stayed silent. Now the boy's suffering weighed heavy on him, his eyes flicking nervously between Desmond and Gregory. The cabin seemed to shrink, the narrow aisle becoming an arena of conflict. Passengers whispered furiously, tension crackling in the air like a storm before lightning. Some clutched their phones tighter, as though gripping weapons of truth. Others simply stared, shocked by the cruelty they had witnessed from a man meant to protect them. Gregory crossed his arms, mask of authority sliding back over his expression. "You're making a scene," he muttered, though his voice carried enough for several passengers to hear. His disdainful glare fell on Desmond, as if daring him to escalate. Desmond inhaled deeply, steadying himself. His son's ragged breathing anchored him. This was no longer just about reaching Eastvale or presenting his craft. His objective had shifted in a heartbeat: protect Malik, ensure immediate care, and make certain Gregory faced the weight of accountability. His resolve crystallized in that moment, sharp and unyielding. The hum of engines returned to prominence as silence settled for a beat, broken only by Malik's soft sobs and the shuffle of feet as passengers leaned closer. The tension had transformed the cabin into a stage, and every movement, every word, seemed charged with consequence. And yet, within the storm, a truth emerged, unspoken but felt. Gregory's cruelty had not gone unseen, nor would it go unanswered. Pain became fire, and fire became resolve. Malik whimpered softly, the sound sharp and piercing against the low hum of the engines, as cold compresses were pressed to his cheek. His small hands clutched desperately at his father's sleeve, the fabric darkened by his trembling grip. The boy's skin was blistering already, red and swollen, angry patches forming where the wax had seared into him. Strands of hair clumped together, stiffened by the cooling wax that had hardened into brittle ridges. His breaths came in shallow bursts, shuddering against the air, every exhale a fragile reminder of the pain etched across his young face. Desmond's heart thundered in his chest, not only with fear, but with a rage so fierce it nearly broke through the calm he was forcing upon himself. His arms shook as he tried to hold the compress steady, whispering words of comfort that even he barely believed. "You're safe, Malik. I've got you," he murmured, voice low and steady despite the fire raging inside him. His instinct screamed for him to rise, to confront Gregory directly, to unleash the storm that had been building since the man's first sneer. But a father's duty overpowered a man's fury, and he knew panic would only deepen his son's terror. Gregory, however, stood tall in the aisle, his posture stiff with a cold defiance that cut through the murmurs of the passengers. His voice rang out, dripping with arrogance as though the sheer strength of his confidence could smother the truth. "He lunged," Gregory declared, his tone firm, rehearsed. "The boy lunged at me. The spill was unavoidable." His words carried across the rows, his eyes sweeping the cabin as if daring anyone to argue. Some passengers glanced at one another uncertainly, their brows furrowing, their doubts twisting between what they had seen and the authority of the uniform before them. The sharp creases of Gregory's jaw, the polished gleam of his name tag, the assertive cadence of his tone, all of it was meant to shield him, to build a wall of authority no ordinary traveler would dare to climb. But the illusion cracked when a man in row 12 rose from his seat. His voice, steady though edged with disbelief, carried clearly over the hum of the cabin. "That's not what happened. I recorded the entire thing." He held up his phone for all to see, the screen dim but unmistakably real, the promise of proof glowing in the soft light. The smirk that had lingered across Gregory's lips faltered, slipping away like a mask no longer fitting the actor. His eyes narrowed into slits, sharp with calculation, before his voice grew sharper, louder, a new tactic unfolding before their eyes. "That recording is not permitted. Airline policy forbids passengers from filming incidents involving crew." His words snapped out like a whip, deliberate and commanding. He leaned toward the man, his hand twitching as if he might seize the device outright. Gasps rippled through the passengers, some leaning back instinctively, others murmuring in protest. No one had ever heard of such a rule. Everyone knew there was no such policy, yet the force with which Gregory spoke made a few hesitate, uncertainty breaking through their outrage. His arrogance, polished into habit, had always been his shield. Desmond rose then, his hand still resting on Malik's shoulder to steady his son, his frame towering in the narrow aisle. His voice was measured but carried a weight that silenced the murmurs. "You will not touch him. That recording is evidence, and you know it." His gaze locked onto Gregory's, a steady flame that would not waver, even as his heart pulsed with fury. Gregory's nostrils flared, his lips curling back into a sneer. He stood still, but his shoulders tensed, the muscles in his jaw twitching as though words unsaid pressed against his teeth. His eyes darted to the passengers, to the faces now watching, some fearful, some enraged, all awake to his cruelty. For the first time, his confidence cracked, not broken, but splintered. The intercom crackled above them, the captain's voice cutting through the storm. "Flight Attendant Gregory Vale, please report to the cockpit immediately." The order was calm, official, yet filled the cabin with a heavy weight of judgment. Gregory's smirk returned, though thinner now, less steady. He straightened his uniform as though brushing away the invisible stains of accusation, and with measured steps, he strode down the aisle toward the cockpit. His eyes caught Desmond's as he passed, a flicker of venom glinting there, a promise that the matter was far from closed. The passengers shifted in their seats, whispers growing louder now, emboldened by the proof that someone had dared to stand against the uniform. Some glanced at Malik, their faces softening in pity and outrage as the boy whimpered again, his cheek pressed against the cool fabric of his father's sleeve. Desmond sank back into his seat, wrapping an arm around his son, his hand steady on Malik's hair where the wax had burned it unevenly. He could feel the boy's trembling, hear the small gasps of breath that broke through his whimpers. His own breath came heavy, measured, his mind racing through possibilities of what might come next. Gregory would not back down easily. Men like him never did. The nurse passenger leaned closer, speaking softly, his hands busy with another compress. "He needs proper medical attention when we land. These burns may scar." His voice was gentle but resolute, a reminder of the reality Desmond already knew. Malik's eyes, glassy from pain, lifted weakly toward his father. His lips parted, and his words came in a trembling whisper that pierced deeper than any shout. He did it on purpose. The truth in those words, spoken through the pain of a child, struck Desmond harder than anything Gregory could have said. It was a truth sharper than the sting of wax, clearer than the blur of rage. He pulled Malik closer, his jaw set, his mind resolved. The cabin seemed to quiet for a moment, the engine's steady drone filling the silence after screams. Passengers exchanged glances, the weight of what they had witnessed sinking deeper. Some filmed in secret, others whispered promises to stand by the boy, but all felt the shift that had taken place. Desmond's eyes stared forward, his grip unyielding, his resolve hardened into something greater than rage. This was no longer about enduring a cruel man's arrogance, it was about exposing the truth behind his cruelty no matter how deep the shadows stretched. In the silence after screams, determination found its voice. Gregory returned from the cockpit minutes later, his steps hard and quick against the narrow aisle. His face was tight with restrained fury, the kind that burned hotter because it had no safe place to land. The captain's rebuke still clung to him, but instead of deflating his arrogance, it had sharpened it into a blade. He stopped abruptly by Desmond and Malik's row, his posture rigid and theatrical, as if he wanted every passenger to see him. With a voice raised just enough to command the attention of the cabin, he announced, "It seems there are false accusations being spread against me. Dangerous rumors with no truth behind them." His words carried a bitter edge, and the tone made it clear he was not speaking to Desmond alone, but to everyone listening. Passengers stirred, heads turning, the hum of private conversations fading into silence. Gregory's gaze lingered on Desmond with open contempt, then slid to Malik, who shrank instinctively against his father's side. With a sneer, Gregory added, "From what I hear, the boy's injuries might not even be what they seem. Accidents at home can sometimes leave marks, can't they? Or perhaps a parental mishap." His suggestion hung in the air like poison, calculated to twist sympathy into doubt. Gasps rippled through the nearby rows. A man in a business suit muttered, "That's outrageous," while a woman clutching her handbag shook her head in disbelief. The atmosphere thickened, the line between truth and manipulation drawn boldly for all to see. Desmond's jaw tightened, his breath steady but heavy, his anger swelling like a tide he refused to let break. Slowly, he rose from his seat, his voice calm yet carrying the force of steel. "You will not insult me or my son," he said firmly, his eyes fixed on Gregory. "Step away." Gregory leaned closer instead, lowering his voice though his expression remained cruelly confident. "You can't control how people see you." Words spread faster than truth, he whispered, his lips curling upward in a false smile, his hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man pretending to maintain professionalism even as venom dripped from his tongue. Desmond didn't flinch, but his hand rested protectively on Malik's shoulder, grounding his son and himself at the same time. Malik, trembling, buried his face into Desmond's chest, muffling a soft, broken whisper only his father could hear. "I want to go home." The words pierced deeper than any insult Gregory had thrown, filling Desmond with both sorrow and determination. His objective sharpened in that moment, not only to shield his son from further harm, but to uncover the truth of Gregory's calculated cruelty, a truth hidden behind the polished veneer of a uniform meant to inspire trust. Meanwhile, at the far end of the aisle, Jordan Mace slipped discreetly into the galley. His face was pale, eyes darting with quiet urgency as he found another crew member lingering near the storage compartments. With hushed tones, Jordan spoke quickly, recounting what he had seen, his words laced with unease but also with resolve. He knew the truth. He had witnessed enough to recognize that Gregory was twisting reality into a weapon. Yet fear clawed at him. Fear of retaliation from a colleague more senior, fear of the company's tendency to protect appearances over people. Still, something in his conscience refused to let silence win. Back in the cabin, Desmond stood taller, his presence steady though his insides churned with rage. He spoke not just to Gregory now, but to the entire plane. "My son was burned because of negligence. You can all see his pain. Do not let lies distract you from what you know is true." His words resonated, pulling murmurs of agreement from passengers who had witnessed the earlier incident. A few nodded, one man clutching his phone tighter as if ready to replay the recording he had captured should the need arise. Gregory's smirk faltered for the first time, but he masked it quickly with a scoff. "You think strangers' sympathy will save you?" he hissed, his voice just low enough to avoid the captain's ears but sharp enough for Desmond to hear. "Airlines know how to bury complaints. People forget. The truth doesn't matter when I control the story." Dramatic irony weighed heavy in the cabin air. Gregory believed he was winning, that his manipulation was sowing doubt and isolating Desmond. But in reality, allies were gathering quietly, passengers holding recordings, whispers traveling between rows, and Jordan preparing to take a risk that could tilt the balance. Desmond, though outwardly calm, felt the storm rising around him. He knew this was not just a clash of tempers but a battle of narratives, one that would decide whether his son's suffering would be dismissed or remembered. Malik's quiet sobs pressed into his shirt, each tremor of the boy's body reminding him of the stakes. The burns on his cheek were not just wounds of flesh, they were scars waiting to be rewritten as either shame or justice. Desmond's hand clenched into a fist by his side, his resolve unbreakable. He looked once more at Gregory, who stood with his false composure and poisoned words, and understood that exposing him would demand not only strength but patience. The cabin seemed to hold its breath, the conflict simmering beneath the surface. Every glance, every whisper, every unspoken alliance built toward an inevitable turning point. Desmond tightened his hold on Malik, whispering softly, "You're safe. I promise." The boy's grip around him eased slightly, though fear still lingered in his wide, dark eyes. And as Gregory straightened, preparing to stride away as if he had won the exchange, Desmond's thought burned with clarity. This was not over. The truth was gathering its witnesses, waiting for the right moment to strike. Sometimes evil wears a smile stitched from lies. Gregory's hand shot forward, reaching for the passenger's phone in row 12 with a sharpness that startled those nearby. "This device is now evidence," he declared, his tone cold and commanding, invoking security regulations, as though the words alone gave him authority. The man holding the phone recoiled, clutching it closer to his chest, his eyes wide with defiance. The surrounding passengers stirred in alarm, their voices rising in protest like a sudden swell of turbulence. "No, you can't take that," one man barked from across the aisle, his voice loud enough to ripple through the cabin. Another passenger leaned into the aisle, arms crossed, his face flushed with indignation. "We all saw what you did," he added firmly, his eyes locking onto Gregory with unflinching certainty. The air, heavy only moments before with whispers and unease, now hummed with open resistance. Gregory's composure faltered. His eyes darted nervously from one face to another, the edges of his confidence fraying as he realized he was not in complete control. His fingers twitched at his side, The same hand that moments earlier had reached so boldly now curling into a fist he dared not swing. A bead of sweat clung to his temple under the cabin lights, but he masked it quickly, forcing his lips into a thin, controlled smirk. His gaze slid sharply toward Desmond, narrowing like a blade drawn in secret. Leaning in just enough for only one man to hear, he muttered, "You'll regret making a scene." His voice was low, steady, but laced with venom, the kind that didn't need volume to strike terror. Desmond's shoulders stiffened at the words, though his eyes remained steady. He would not give Gregory the satisfaction of a reaction, but inside, his chest burned with restrained fury. The passengers exchanged glances, sensing the undercurrent of danger in Gregory's tone, though not all had heard the exact words. The dramatic irony sharpened. Their outrage empowered Desmond, yet only he understood the quiet threat that promised more to come. He adjusted his grip on Malik, who sat pressed against his side, small fingers clinging to his father's shirt as if anchoring to safety. Desmond whispered reassurance into his son's ear, his voice calm, though inside he felt the rising weight of battle. The intercom crackled suddenly, slicing through the tense air. The captain's voice filled the cabin, deep and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. Authorities will be meeting this flight upon landing to address a serious passenger complaint." The announcement silenced the whispers for a moment, drawing every eye forward. Some passengers exhaled in relief, while others exchanged grim nods, understanding that what they had witnessed would not be dismissed easily. Gregory, however, stiffened at the words. His smirk, faint but deliberate, returned like a mask pulled tightly into place. He straightened his shoulders, adjusting his uniform with a flick of his wrist as though nothing unsettled him. Yet behind the mask, his eyes gleamed with something dangerous, as if the captain's announcement had not weakened him, but reminded him of the hidden cards he still held. Unbeknownst to Desmond, those cards lay in the very halls of Skyreach's management. Gregory had allies, supervisors, and administrators who had long shielded him, burying complaints, silencing whispers, and twisting truths until they vanished. He knew their weight would fall in his favor once the plane touched the ground, and that knowledge fueled his smirk even as passengers glared with contempt. Desmond sensed it. Though he could not yet see the full reach of Gregory's shield, his instincts pulsed with warning. The battle was larger than the cabin, larger than this flight. What began with wax and cruelty would not end at the runway. He looked down at Malik, whose small frame trembled under the thin airplane blanket, and tightened his hold. His thoughts hardened into promise, an iron vow that truth would not vanish under polished lies. The cabin settled into uneasy silence as the plane pressed on, the hum of engines louder now than any voice dared to be. Every eye flicked between Gregory and Desmond, between the villain's smirk and the father's quiet resolve, waiting for the next spark in a fire that already burned too hot. Yet Desmond sat still, a rock against the storm, his grip on Malik unshaken. When shadows stretch long, they reveal the shape of something bigger. As the plane began its steady descent, the cabin shuddered with a low mechanical groan, the landing gear unfolding beneath them. The atmosphere was heavy with unease, an invisible current that seemed to tighten around every passenger's shoulders. Gregory Vale moved deliberately through the aisle, his posture suddenly softened, his expression reshaped into a mask of forced courtesy. He paused at Desmond Rowan's row, where Malik sat pressed against his father's side, bandaged and trembling. Gregory's voice slipped out like oil, smooth yet insincere. "Sir," he began, his tone carefully measured, "about the unfortunate accident earlier. I'd like to personally assist in filing an incident report for your son's burns. It will ensure proper documentation once we land." His words carried the cadence of professionalism, but his eyes betrayed the truth. Cold and unblinking, they revealed the same contempt that had fueled every action before. Desmond met that gaze with steady calm, though his jaw tightened as he wrapped his arm protectively around Malik. He could hear the faint rasp of his son's breathing, could feel the child's small hand trembling in his own. "No," Desmond said firmly, his voice even but weighted with conviction. "My son will receive medical attention from independent professionals, not from a report you write to protect yourself." Gregory's polite smile twitched, faltering for a heartbeat before his jaw locked in frustration. A ripple of whispers spread among nearby passengers, their murmurs carrying a current of solidarity. Several leaned forward, voices clear and resolute. "We'll testify," one man declared, raising his hand slightly as if pledging in court. "I saw everything," another added, his voice sharp with indignation. Gregory's gaze flickered around the cabin, his facade cracking as he realized that Desmond was no longer isolated. The once silent passengers, once hesitant to intervene, were now shifting into allies. Desmond could sense the momentum turning, but he also knew better than to trust in appearances. The look on Gregory's face was not defeat, it was calculation. With a slow, deliberate movement, Gregory tilted his head toward the galley. His hand brushed against the side of his uniform, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but enough to draw the attention of another crew member lurking near the curtain. The crew member gave a brief nod, subtle enough that most would miss it. Desmond caught the flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye, and a sharp pang of instinct told him this was not over. That single signal was like the crack of a match in a dark room, small, but hinting at fire to come. Malik shifted against his father, his voice faint and shaky. "He's scared now," the boy whispered, his eyes fixed on Gregory as if sensing the tremor beneath the man's false composure. His words were quiet, but they carried an unexpected weight. Desmond felt a surge of both pride and sorrow at his son's perception. Gregory leaned closer, lowering his voice, the veneer of sympathy stripped away. "Think carefully, Mr. Rowan. These things can be resolved quietly, with dignity and tact." His tone, though hushed, pulsed with a veiled threat. Desmond did not flinch. His thoughts raced. He understood the danger in Gregory's words, the foreshadowing of battles that extended far beyond the confines of this cabin. Still, he knew yielding now would mean surrendering not only his son's dignity, but also the truth itself. He spoke with quiet finality. Dignity is not built on silence. The passengers around them stirred again, their whispers swelling like a tide. Gregory's mask shattered fully, and for a fleeting moment his lips pressed into a thin line of pure venom. But he did not lash out. Instead, he straightened, tugging his uniform into place, his eyes cold and calculating. The cabin vibrated with the hum of descent. Overhead compartments rattled slightly, and the faint screech of hydraulics filled the air as the runway neared. Outside, streaks of city lights bled through the small windows, painting the interior with fleeting bands of gold and silver. Yet inside the plane, the tension was heavier than ever, pressing down on every breath. Desmond's mind was a storm of thoughts, anger at Gregory's cruelty, fear for what lay ahead, but also determination that justice would not be buried beneath corporate smiles and whispered threats. He glanced at Malik, whose small body trembled against him, but whose eyes, though glazed with pain, still held a fragile spark of defiance. The boy had seen enough to understand that their fight was not over. The landing gear clamped down with a final metallic thud, and the wheels soon screeched against the runway, jolting the passengers in their seats. Relief should have come with that moment, the knowledge that the earth was once again beneath them. Yet the atmosphere remained taut, as though danger itself had strapped in for the landing. Gregory lingered in the aisle for a final second, his hand brushing once more against his uniform, the faintest curl of a smirk tugging at his lips before he turned away. It was not the expression of a man defeated. It was the look of someone already plotting his next move. Desmond tightened his grip on Malik, heart pounding with the knowledge that safety was still out of reach. The boy clung to him, whispering softly, "It's not over, is it?" Desmond lowered his gaze, brushing Malik's hair gently with his hand, unable to promise a comfort he did not feel. The groaning of the landing gear echoed in his ears like the prelude to another storm. The cabin lights flickered slightly as the plane rolled to its halt, and the air felt thick, hotter than before, like smoke that lingered after a fire had been smothered but not extinguished. Every face in the cabin carried the same unspoken awareness that this was only the beginning. Sometimes landing does not mean safety, it means the real fight begins. He tried to scar a black kid with cruelty. Certain silence would protect him. If you believe every act of abuse must be answered, hit subscribe. Justice starts here. The plane taxied to a stop, its wheels grinding against the tarmac with a metallic shudder as the cabin filled with the steady hum of engines cooling down. Red and blue lights flickered through the oval windows, bathing the passengers' anxious faces in flashes of urgency. The air was heavy, thick with anticipation, every cough and shuffle amplified in the tense silence. Then the door opened and 2 airport security officers climbed aboard, their polished shoes clicking against the floor. Their expressions were stern, but their eyes betrayed hesitation, as though they already sensed they were stepping into a story with too many versions waiting to be told. Gregory Vale wasted no time. He moved forward with calculated swiftness, his tall frame blocking the aisle, his voice rising above the nervous murmurs. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," he said, his tone practiced, polished, almost theatrical. He pointed a stiff finger toward Desmond and Malik, his lip curling in feigned frustration. "The boy was restless the entire flight. There was an accident during service, and his father has chosen to exaggerate what happened for sympathy." Gregory's voice carried the weight of authority, his words rolling with the confidence of a man used to being believed. For a fleeting moment, the officers hesitated, their brows furrowing, as though the neatness of his explanation fit too well into their expectations of order. Desmond Rowan felt his chest tighten, but his calm was unshaken. He rose slowly, careful not to jostle Malik, who clung to his sleeve with wide, fearful eyes. His voice, though steady, carried a firmness that cut through the cabin like steel. "That's not the truth," he said, his gaze steady on the officers. His hand moved deliberately, pulling the passenger's phone from the row behind him. He raised it high, the screen glowing in the dim cabin lights. "This is the truth." The recording flickered to life, the shaky image showing Gregory tipping the candle with deliberate precision, wax spilling in a cruel arc onto Malik's arm and cheek. The boy's scream pierced through the speakers, raw and undeniable. Gasps erupted around the cabin, a chorus of disbelief and anger. Heads turned sharply toward Gregory, eyes narrowing with judgment that no argument could wash away. One of the officers leaned forward, his face stiff, while the other shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsettled. The passengers erupted in murmurs, their whispers carrying like ripples through the silence. "He did it on purpose?" "I saw it too." "That poor boy." The words swirled around Gregory like chains, dragging at the authority he tried so desperately to hold on to. Jordan Mays stepped out from the galley then, his hands trembling as he clutched a service towel. His voice wavered, but the courage in it was unmistakable. "It's true," he said, glancing nervously at Gregory before looking back at the officers. "I saw him do it. The boy never lunged, never reached. Gregory tipped the wax himself." His face was pale, his lips dry, but his words rang out with the weight of conscience finally freed. Gregory's expression faltered. His confident smirk drained into something rigid and pale. For a moment his eyes darted around the cabin, seeking allies, but none met his gaze. Passengers stared back with hard anger, phones still raised, their silence a verdict stronger than words. His lips parted, but no excuse came. Only a whisper slipped through, venomous and low. "This isn't over." The officers exchanged glances, the taller one pulling a notepad from his pocket while the other gestured for Gregory to step aside. The once dominant flight attendant obeyed with stiff movements, but his jaw remained tight, the cold fire in his eyes promising that the fight was far from finished. Dramatic irony lingered heavily. Desmond knew this moment was not victory, but the opening of a deeper battle, one where truth would be challenged by influence and connections hidden in polished offices far beyond the plane. Desmond lowered the phone, his hand trembling now that the moment had passed. Malik tugged at his sleeve, his small voice breaking through the storm of murmurs. "Why did he hate me?" he asked, his eyes wide with confusion and pain, the innocence of the question heavier than any accusation could ever be. Desmond knelt beside him, his own throat tight with emotions he could not fully voice. He pressed a hand gently against his son's back, his gaze never leaving Gregory's pale figure at the front of the cabin. His answer came not with volume, but with unshakable conviction, each word carrying the weight of a promise. The truth, though heavy, can never be silenced. The chaos did not end with Gregory's removal from the plane. The air inside the terminal felt heavier than the recycled air of the cabin, buzzing with whispers from passengers who had followed the drama all the way to the gate. Desmond carried Malik in his arms as they were directed into a small holding room tucked behind a frosted glass door. The boy whimpered against his father's shoulder, his skin raw where the hot wax had clung, the burns glistening red beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. The sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint hum of an old ventilation system, creating an atmosphere that felt less like a refuge and more like an interrogation chamber. A young male medic entered swiftly, his Navy uniform creased, eyes widening at the sight of Malik's blistered cheek. He lowered his kit onto the table with practiced precision and spoke gently. "Let's bandage him first. He's going to be all right." His hands moved quickly, unrolling gauze and pressing a cold pad against Malik's skin. The boy winced, clenching his father's sleeve tighter while Desmond stroked his son's hair, whispering steady words meant to soothe. Yet, behind his calm tone, his heart hammered like a fist against a door. As the medic worked, Desmond's mind replayed Gregory's last sneering words. "You'll regret making a scene." The threat lingered like smoke in his thoughts. He tried to focus on Malik, tried to breathe in rhythm with his son's shallow breaths, but unease clawed at the edges of his calm. He knew cruelty did not end with one man being escorted away. It spread, hidden in systems that taught men like Gregory to believe they were untouchable. The door creaked open again. A tall man in a tailored gray suit stepped inside, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. His presence filled the room not with warmth, but with an unsettling authority. He introduced himself smoothly. Leonard Crail, corporate liaison for Skyreach. His voice carried the steady confidence of someone used to controlling narratives before they reached the public. His expression was sympathetic on the surface, his brow furrowed slightly, yet his eyes carried no softness, only calculation. "I understand there was an unfortunate event on your flight," Leonard began, clasping his hands together as if the matter was routine. "I want to assure you, Skyreach takes these things very seriously." Desmond turned his gaze on him, protective instinct rising in his chest. "My son was burned," he said evenly, though his jaw tightened. "This was not an accident. You saw the footage by now, I'm sure. Gregory Vale poured that wax on him deliberately." Leonard tilted his head as though listening carefully, then exhaled softly. "What happened is regrettable, of course, but misunderstandings in high-stress environments can look worse than they are. The important thing is Malik is receiving care." He gestured toward the medic, whose hands still awkwardly caught in the tension between them. "Misunderstanding," Desmond repeated, his voice sharpening. He leaned forward, the edge in his tone unshaken. He screamed. "He is scarred. That man mocked us before he did it, and then tried to cover it up. Don't stand here and call that a misunderstanding." For a moment, Leonard's mask slipped, the faintest twitch in his smile betraying irritation, but then he smoothed it over with corporate polish, lowering his tone into something that almost resembled kindness. "Mr. Rowan, I can see you are a proud man who wants justice. That is admirable. But let me be candid with you." He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only Desmond could hear. "Incidents like these are better resolved quietly. Public cases get messy. Your son's name becomes part of headlines. Your own reputation will be dragged through the mud by lawyers who don't care about truth. What I am offering you is a chance to shield your boy from that ugliness." He slipped a thin envelope from his inner pocket and placed it on the table, the weight of its contents evident even before Desmond touched it. Malik shifted uncomfortably on the chair, his small hand still gripping his father's sleeve as if sensing the tension. Desmond stared at the envelope, then slowly raised his eyes to Leonard. "You want me to sell my son's pain for your company's comfort." His voice was quiet, but the steel beneath it was unmissable. Leonard's smile thinned, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. "I am offering you compensation, enough to ensure your son has what he needs. Medical care, financial stability, these things are not trivial." His polished tone sharpened just slightly, the warning beneath the words becoming clear. "If this goes further, you'll be fighting not just one man, but an entire institution. And institutions, Mr. Rowan, are not easy to defeat." The medic looked away, busying himself with his kit, though the unease on his face betrayed that he, too, had heard the threat buried in those words. Desmond reached down and touched Malik's hand, grounding himself in the trembling fingers of his son. His decision was already forming, not from pride, but from the quiet conviction that Malik's suffering must mean something more than silence. He pushed the envelope back across the table. The paper slid slowly, a sound that cut through the heavy quiet like a blade. "I don't want your money," Desmond said firmly, meeting Leonard's gaze with unwavering resolve. "I want accountability. I want to make sure no other child, no other family goes through this. My son will not be silenced." For the first time, Leonard's confident mask cracked. His eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a thin line. He gathered the envelope back into his suit, straightening as though adjusting armor. "Very well," he said smoothly, but his voice was colder now, clipped of its earlier sympathy. "You may find that path far more difficult than you expect. But if that is your choice—" He gave a small rehearsed nod and turned to leave. Desmond's gaze followed him to the door, his chest tight with both fear and determination. He knew Leonard was not bluffing. There would be obstacles, powerful ones, waiting just beyond this room. Gregory's arrogance had not been born in isolation. It had been nurtured, defended, and emboldened by men like Leonard and the system they represented. Malik whispered faintly, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "Papa? Are we going to be okay?" Desmond pulled him closer, pressing a steady hand against his back. His answer came not with the certainty of a man who knew the road ahead, but with the conviction of a father who refused to bend. "We will, Malik, because we won't stop." Unbeknownst to Desmond, another shadow already moved behind the walls of Skyreach. Gregory, bitter and desperate, had already reached out to someone higher, someone whose influence stretched far beyond this room. The path ahead would not simply be difficult, it would be dangerous. When a door closes, sometimes it reveals the walls built to keep truth out. Desmond left the airport with Malik cradled in his arms, the boy's body heavy with the dulling effect of medication. His son's small frame pressed against his chest, his breathing uneven and fragile, each inhale like a reminder of the cruelty they had just endured. The terminal doors slid open, and the cool night air brushed Desmond's face. The outside world was waiting, reporters, passengers with phones raised, and flashes of cameras that cut through the dark like lightning. Voices called out his name, questions spilled into the air. "What happened on board, sir?" "Is it true a crew member attacked your child?" But Desmond's jaw tightened. He kept walking, his silence deliberate. He knew anything he said in this moment could be twisted, reshaped into words that would serve someone else's story, not his own. The crowd pressed closer, lenses gleaming with hunger. A young reporter darted ahead of him, microphone thrust forward, but Desmond shifted Malik higher on his shoulder, his expression a mask of quiet defiance. The boy stirred weakly, whispering, "Why did it happen, Papa?" His voice was soft, slurred with exhaustion, yet it cut through the chaos like a blade. Desmond's chest tightened. He had no answer that would not crush the child further, so he pressed his lips against Malik's temple and whispered only, "Rest now, son. I'll make sure no one forgets what was done." By the time they reached the car, the noise of the press had faded into the background, though its echo remained in Desmond's head. The ride home was silent, the city lights stretching past the window in blurred streaks. His thoughts churned restlessly, the burns on Malik's cheek, the cruel smirk of Gregory, and the chilling realization that even as his son screamed, the airline had tried to protect the man responsible. Rage simmered under Desmond's calm exterior, but above it all was resolve. He could not let the weight of this injustice slip into obscurity, as so many others had. That evening, their modest home was dim and quiet, every sound amplified by the stillness. Desmond sat by Malik's bed, watching as the boy turned fitfully in his sleep. A faint groan escaped the child's lips, his arm twitching against the bandages that wrapped his burns. Desmond leaned closer, brushing back strands of hair unevenly cut by the nurse to clear the scorched patches. Malik murmured again, half-conscious, "It hurts, Papa. Why me?" The words struck Desmond harder than any blow he had ever endured. His hands trembled as he smoothed the blanket over Malik, forcing steadiness into his voice as he replied, "It's not you, son. It's the cruelty of a man who thought no one would stop him. But he will be stopped. I promise." Later, the television flickered with breaking news. The incident had already spread, fueled by the recordings passengers had leaked online. A polished news anchor recounted the airline's statement, calling the matter a tragic misunderstanding. Her tone almost rehearsed. Desmond's eyes narrowed, his fists clenching against the armrest of the chair. The words were like poison, misunderstanding, as though Malik's blistered skin were the result of chance, as though Gregory's sneer had not been deliberate. What stung most was the revelation tucked neatly at the end of the report. Gregory had not been suspended, not even removed. He had been reassigned to administrative duties, protected, shielded. The hammer of realization fell hard inside Desmond's chest. Skyreach had no intention of holding him accountable. Desmond rose abruptly, pacing the narrow living room. Shadows stretched long across the walls, cast by the flickering light of the television. He could almost see Gregory's face in them, the arrogance etched into every sneer. His thoughts raced with questions. How many times had this man been covered for before? How many families had been forced into silence by the same polished lies? He turned back toward the bedroom door where Malik slept. The boy stirred, his voice fragile, calling out in his dreams. Desmond stopped, his hand tightening on the frame of the door. He swore silently that no matter how powerful Skyreach was, no matter how carefully they buried the truth, he would not let his son's pain vanish into corporate shadows. The night deepened, quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional honk from a distant street. Desmond sat once more at the table, staring at his phone. His body ached with exhaustion, but his mind refused rest. He scrolled through messages from passengers who had promised to support him, each word of encouragement a reminder that the fight was larger than his household. He set the phone down, pressing his palms together, when suddenly it buzzed again, an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A voice slithered through the line, low and deliberate. "If you value your son," it warned, "drop this." For a moment, Desmond could not speak. His breath caught, his knuckles whitening around the phone. The caller did not wait for a reply. The line went dead, leaving behind a silence more menacing than any shouted threat. He stared at the screen, heart pounding, the weight of the message settling like ice in his chest. They were watching him already, reaching into his home, his sanctuary. The battle he had prepared for was not just about one man. It was about a system that thrived on fear and silence. Desmond turned toward Malik's room once more, his face hardening with resolve. His son shifted under the covers, muttering in his sleep, his small hand clenching as if fighting against something unseen. Desmond stepped closer, brushing his hand gently against the boy's forehead, and whispered, "They won't win. Not this time." And though the house remained quiet, the weight of the unseen enemy pressed in from every shadow, every corner, every echo of the day's events. The danger was no longer confined to the plane, it had followed them home, intent on breaking their spirit. Yet Desmond's determination only grew. He would not bend. He would not break. In the silence of night, danger whispered louder than truth. Desmond sat stiffly in the leather chair across from Marcus Bell, the lawyer's office dimly lit except for the desk lamp casting long shadows across files stacked high. The air was thick with the smell of paper and coffee gone cold. Desmond's jaw was tight as he replayed the phone recording for Marcus. The moment Gregory Vale leaned over Malik and deliberately tipped the candle, the boy's scream echoing faintly through the small speaker. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his sharp eyes fixed on the screen. He did not interrupt, only furrowed his brow deeper as the video played to its chilling end. When the silence fell, broken only by the faint hum of the building's ventilation, Marcus let out a long breath. "This isn't the first time," Marcus said finally, his voice low, as if admitting something dangerous. His fingers tapped once against the desk, steady and controlled. "Skyreach has faced accusations like this before, claims buried under sealed settlements, complaints that never saw the light of day. I've read whispers of them in old case files, but this video makes the pattern undeniable." Desmond clenched his fists on his knees, his knuckles pale. "You're telling me they've been protecting him, protecting people like him." His voice carried both disbelief and fury, though it remained calm enough to suggest he had learned to bury his emotions beneath layers of control. Marcus nodded slowly. Gregory Vale wasn't just tolerated, he was useful. Men like him are often chosen to silence trouble before it grows. They intimidate, they threaten, and when someone resists, the company shields them. It's a cycle. His eyes narrowed, studying Desmond carefully. "If you take this case, you must understand. It won't just be about what happened on that plane. It will become about you. They will turn their sights on your character, your past, your reputation. Everything." The words sat heavy in the room. Desmond glanced at the door as though expecting someone to burst in, then back at Marcus. "I don't care what they do to me. They burned my boy. They let it happen. If they've silenced others, then that's all the more reason I can't stop." His voice shook at the edges, but it was not weakness. It was the sound of resolve solidifying. Marcus leaned back, folding his hands together. "Then we prepare. We file immediately. But brace yourself. The counterattack will come faster than you expect." The warning proved true within days. Rumors surfaced online, sharp and precise as if drafted by professionals. Articles appeared on small forums and then spread wider. Claims that Desmond was unstable, that he had once lashed out violently at work, that he was a difficult father inventing stories for attention. The lies multiplied like weeds, each one designed to cast doubt before the case could even reach a courtroom. Desmond sat at his kitchen table one night, scrolling through headlines on his phone while Malik slept fitfully in the next room. His stomach twisted at each accusation, but he forced himself to breathe, to remember Marcus's words. At school, Malik felt the sting of the campaign. Whispers followed him down hallways. A classmate muttered that his father was crazy. Another suggested that Malik had made up the whole burn thing. The boy came home one afternoon, his bandages still visible, and dropped his backpack with trembling hands. Desmond caught him before he could retreat to his room. "They're lying about us, Dad," Malik whispered, his voice breaking. His eyes brimmed with tears he fought to hold back. "They're saying you're bad, that I'm lying." Desmond knelt to meet his son's eyes, his hand steady on the boy's shoulder. "Listen to me. Lies are what people use when they're afraid of the truth. They want us to give up, but we won't. You are not lying, and I will never stop fighting for you." His voice was strong, almost commanding, but his chest ached as he saw how much the boy carried. That night, Desmond stood by the window, staring at the quiet street outside. The neighborhood looked calm, but he felt the invisible pressure of unseen eyes. Marcus had been right. The cruelty had left the cabin of that airplane and found its way into their home. It stalked them now, shaping itself into shadows of doubt and whispers of slander. Desmond pressed his palm against the cool glass, whispering to himself as much as to the night. "They think they can bury us, but the truth doesn't stay buried forever." His objective no longer ended with protecting Malik from Gregory Vale. It grew larger, heavier, an iron weight he was determined to carry. He would expose the airline's corruption, drag every buried secret into the open, and shield his son from becoming just another forgotten victim crushed by corporate silence. The cost would be high, but Desmond's resolve burned brighter than the lies hurled at him. When truth becomes dangerous, lies multiply like shadows. The gavel struck sharply against the wooden block, and silence washed over the courtroom like a wave retreating from shore. Skyreach's lead attorney rose, his suit a perfect blend of power and polish, and his voice carried with the assurance of someone accustomed to winning. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, gesturing toward Gregory Vale, who sat with his back straight and chin lifted. "This man has served passengers with distinction for years. He has an impeccable record, praised by colleagues and passengers alike. What we see here today is not the truth, but exaggeration, spun from panic and misunderstanding." His words were crisp, deliberate, and meant to strike doubt into the hearts of everyone listening. Desmond Rowan sat at the plaintiff's table, his jaw tight, hands clenched against the smooth wood surface. His son, Malik, sat beside him, bandages still visible across his cheek and arm. The boy leaned gently against his father, his small frame swallowed by the chair. Desmond's heart ached, not just for the burns Malik endured, but for the storm of lies being painted before the jury. He knew the truth was on their side, but Skyreach's lawyers had resources, experience, and arrogance on theirs. Marcus Bell, Desmond's attorney, adjusted his tie and rose slowly, his movements calm but deliberate, like a man who had fought giants before. He spoke with a firm, steady tone. "Impeccable service?" he asked, holding up a folder thick with documents. "Or impeccable cover-ups?" the courtroom murmured as he flipped open the file, pulling out the first sheet. 10 prior complaints against Mr. Vale, all closed without investigation. 10 passengers, all silenced. 10 reports, all vanished. He let the words sink into the air before locking eyes with the jury. "Do we call that a record of service or a record of silence?" Gasps rippled through the gallery. Gregory shifted in his seat, his smirk wavering for the first time, but his lawyer quickly interjected, objecting on grounds of irrelevance. The judge, stern and weary from the clash of voices, overruled. "Proceed, Mr. Bell," he instructed, his eyes narrowing. Marcus's voice grew sharper as he called his first witness. "Mr. Jordan Mace, please take the stand." Jordan, the young attendant who had stood silently for so long, walked nervously to the witness box. His hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the railing. "You were present on Flight 782?" Marcus asked. Jordan nodded, his voice low but clear. "Yes, I saw what happened. Gregory Vale didn't lose balance. He tilted the candle, on purpose." His voice cracked, but his eyes held steady as he glanced at Malik, who sat clutching his father's hand. And I brought water to cool the burns. I knew it wasn't an accident. The defense pounced quickly, trying to undermine him. Mr. Mace, you are a junior attendant, are you not? Perhaps inexperienced, perhaps emotional in your judgment. But Jordan stood firmer this time. I may be young, but I know the difference between an accident and intent. He wanted to hurt that child. His words carried conviction, and murmurs spread once more through the audience. The trial intensified as Marcus introduced the most damning evidence, a whistleblower. The witness's identity remained hidden behind a screen, his voice altered for protection. I worked in Skyreach's complaint division, the man admitted, his voice shaking. We were ordered by supervisors to shred incident reports involving Vale. They said it was to protect the airline's reputation. I destroyed at least 5 reports with my own hands. The words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted from the gallery, and even the judge leaned forward, his knuckles white against the bench. You're saying corporate leaders instructed you to destroy evidence? The judge pressed. Yes, came the trembling reply. Gregory's composure cracked. He shifted in his chair, eyes darting, lips pressed tight as if holding back curses he dared not speak. His lawyer tried to redirect, but the damage was done. The jury stared with wide, disbelieving eyes. This was no longer just about one cruel flight attendant. It was about a system built on silence and buried truth. During a brief recess, Malik leaned against his father's arm. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. Are we winning? Desmond turned, meeting his son's uncertain eyes. He wanted to reassure him, but doubt lingered in his chest. Skyreach was vast, with layers of defense thicker than steel, yet he refused to let Malik see his fear. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his voice calm and steady. Yes, son, we're winning. His words were steady, but deep inside he wondered how far Skyreach would go to protect itself and what it might cost them both. The gavel struck again, calling the court back to order. The air was heavier now, thick with anticipation. Leonard Crail's shadow loomed in Desmond's mind, the man who had warned him to resolve quietly, whose polished words had carried threats disguised as counsel. This was bigger than he had first believed. As Marcus prepared to call the next witness, Desmond's heart pounded, torn between fear and determination. He knew this was no longer just about Malik. This was about the countless voices silenced before them, the buried reports, the ignored complaints. And though the weight threatened to crush him, his resolve only grew. The session closed for the day with the jury visibly shaken, their expressions marked by disbelief and outrage. The gallery buzzed with whispers, and reporters scribbled furiously. As Desmond guided Malik from the courtroom, his steps felt heavy but unbroken. For the first time, he felt the tide shifting in their favor, though the fight was far from over. In the heart of justice, battles are fought not with fists, but with truth. Ellis Varn's words struck the courtroom like a thunderclap. He sat rigid in the witness chair, his hands gripping the edges as though bracing himself against invisible weight. His voice, though low, carried a sharpness that cut through the silence. I saw the emails. Gregory bragged about teaching lessons to passengers. He thought humiliating them made him stronger. The room, which had been buzzing only moments before, fell into a stillness so complete that even the shuffling of papers seemed to echo. Desmond felt the shift instantly. The atmosphere changed from cautious skepticism to shock laced with outrage. Across the aisle, Gregory Vale's composure cracked. His lips, usually pressed into a smirk of superiority, twitched as though trying to form a response, but failing. His hands trembled where they rested on the polished table, the tremor visible even under the harsh overhead lights. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering furiously, his face pale. For the first time, Desmond saw the mask of arrogance slip into raw fear. The judge adjusted his glasses, his expression grim as he leaned forward. Mr. Varn, he said slowly, the weight of the words filling the chamber. Are you telling this court that Mr. Vale intentionally harmed passengers and that management had knowledge of these emails? Ellis swallowed hard, his Adam's apple rising and falling like a trapped stone. Yes, Your Honor. Those emails weren't hidden. They were circulated to a small group. We were told to ignore them. I regret staying silent before, but I can't now. His voice shook, but his conviction was steady, each word landing like iron. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Some spectators whispered furiously to one another. Others sat in stunned silence. Desmond glanced at Malik, seated quietly beside Marcus Bell, the lawyer who had become their anchor. Malik's wide eyes reflected the glow of the courtroom's lamps, his scarred cheek catching the light. The boy looked at his father with a mix of hope and fear, as if sensing both the victory within reach and the danger that still lingered. The judge banged the gavel once, restoring order. "This court will review every sealed complaint against Mr. Vale," he declared, his tone carrying finality. The announcement sent another shockwave through the room. Gregory's defense attorney visibly flinched, hurriedly flipping through documents as if they could somehow erase what had been revealed. Gregory himself hunched forward, fingers digging into the tabletop, sweat beading on his temple. Desmond's chest tightened. Relief mingled with caution. The truth was finally tearing through the walls Skyreach had built, but he knew the battle wasn't yet over. He leaned closer to Marcus, whispering, "They can't hide it anymore." "Not after this." Marcus nodded, though his jaw was tight. "We've cracked their armor, Desmond, but they're not finished. They'll try to buy silence." His prediction came true sooner than either expected. That evening, after court adjourned, a representative from the airline approached Desmond privately. The man's suit was flawless, his briefcase polished, his smile carefully measured. "Mr. Rowan," he began, his tone smooth as silk, "Skyreach is prepared to make a substantial offer, enough to cover medical expenses, education for your son, and more. All we ask is that you agree to keep this matter confidential." He slid a folder across the table, the edges of the papers inside gleaming under the light. Desmond didn't open it. His fists clenched at his sides, his thoughts torn between temptation and principle. The offer was life-changing, the kind of security he had never dreamed possible for Malik. For one long, sleepless night, he wrestled with the weight of that choice. Alone in his small apartment, he paced the floor as the city outside hummed with life. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Malik's burns, heard his screams, and felt the injustice in the pit of his chest. At one point, Desmond stood over Malik's bed, watching his son sleep. The boy's face, half lit by the moonlight through the window, carried the faint scars left by Gregory's cruelty. Malik shifted in his sleep, murmuring something incoherent, his small hand clutching at the blanket. Desmond's heart ached with love and fury in equal measure. He thought of the settlement, of the promise of comfort, of the chance to shield Malik from further pain. But alongside it came the bitter truth. If he accepted, the voices of others who had been silenced would remain buried, their suffering erased. His reflection in the darkened glass of the window showed a man torn in two, but when he turned back to his son, clarity returned. He remembered Malik whispering on the plane. He did it on purpose. The certainty in that small voice, despite pain and fear, was more powerful than any legal argument. Desmond could not betray that truth. By dawn, his decision was set. He sat by Malik's bedside, exhaustion weighing heavy but resolve burning brighter. He reached out, brushing a hand gently over his son's hair, careful not to wake him. His whisper was more to himself than to the sleeping boy. "We won't be silent. Not for money, not for comfort, not for anything." His eyes hardened, the weariness replaced by determination as the first light of day crept into the room. He knew the path ahead would be harsher, filled with more attacks and more lies. But he also knew surrender would mean losing not just justice for Malik, but justice for all the forgotten names behind sealed complaints and shredded reports. Silence would mean Gregory's cruelty, and the system that protected him would win again. Desmond would not allow it. Some battles are won not by what you take, but by what you refuse to surrender. The gavel struck sharply against the wooden block, echoing through the hushed courtroom like the final toll of a bell. The jury foreman's words still hung heavy in the air. Skyreach was guilty, guilty of negligence, guilty of a cover-up, guilty of systemic abuse that had endangered the very people it claimed to serve. Gasps rippled through the rows of spectators, followed by a tense silence as the magnitude of the verdict sank in. Reporters shifted forward, their pens scratching, cameras clicking like a storm of mechanical wings. Gregory Vale, once towering in arrogance, now slumped in his chair, his eyes darting wildly as the judge pronounced his sentence. Stripped of his license and condemned to years in prison, he no longer resembled the man who had sneered at Desmond Rowan mid-flight. He looked diminished, broken under the weight of truth finally unchained. Desmond sat still, his hand resting firmly on Malik's shoulder. He could feel his son's small frame trembling beside him, but the boy's gaze was steady, locked on the man who had caused him so much pain. For Malik, it was not fear that filled his eyes, but a quiet defiance, the look of someone who had survived fire and chosen to rise from it. Desmond's heart swelled with pride, though exhaustion pressed heavily upon him. The trial had drained them both, each day a battle against lies, manipulation, and intimidation. Yet now, as the words of justice rang through the courtroom, the fatigue seemed almost worth bearing. When the session adjourned, reporters surged forward. Microphones were thrust toward Desmond, cameras flashing so brightly that Malik flinched. "Mr. Rowan, how do you feel about today's verdict?" one voice called out. Desmond adjusted his grip on Malik's hand before answering, his voice steady despite the noise. "This isn't just about us. It's about every family who sat in silence because they thought no one would believe them. Today proves that silence can be broken." His words were firm, his eyes burning with a conviction that even the cameras could not distort. Malik clung to him tighter, a boy both comforted and overwhelmed by the sudden flood of attention. Among the reporters stood Marcus Bell, his lawyer, who addressed the crowd with a calm authority that commanded respect. "This verdict is not the end, but a beginning," he declared, his deep voice cutting through the cacophony. "We will launch a foundation dedicated to protecting victims of corporate abuse, with Mr. Rowan standing as one of its founding members. Justice must be more than a single case. It must be a safeguard for the future." The announcement ignited a new wave of murmurs, the promise of something greater rising from the ashes of the trial. Desmond exchanged a brief glance with Marcus, a silent acknowledgement that the struggle had forged not only justice, but purpose. Months passed, yet the echoes of the courtroom lingered in every corner of their lives. Malik's burns slowly healed, leaving behind faint scars that traced his cheek and arm like reminders etched into flesh. The boy no longer flinched when strangers stared at him. Instead, he carried himself with a quiet resilience, as though the scars were medals of survival. Desmond often watched him sketch by the window, his brow furrowed in concentration, and saw in him not just a child but someone aged by trial, yet strengthened by it. One day, as winter light spilled through the vast glass of the newly renovated East Vale terminal, Desmond and Malik walked side by side through its polished halls. The space felt different, cleaner, brighter, alive with the hum of change. Rows of flight attendants stood in training sessions, their voices repeating pledges of care and accountability. Instructors guided them through simulations of empathy, their words echoing against walls freshly painted with the airline's renewed motto. Desmond paused, watching silently, his arms folded across his chest. A faint smile tugged at his lips, not born of joy but of hard-earned vindication. Malik, taller now in spirit though still young in years, looked up at his father. The scars on his face caught the light, faint yet unmissable. He leaned closer, his voice low but certain. "We changed something, didn't we?" he asked, his dark eyes reflecting both hope and the weight of memory. Desmond placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder, squeezing gently, his own eyes fixed on the scene before them, the very industry that had once tried to silence them now forced to confront its shadows. He nodded slowly, the corners of his mouth lifting just slightly. The price had been high, heavier than he had ever wished for his son to bear, but standing there, he knew it had been worth it. Sometimes justice burns brighter than the fire meant to destroy. Minutes later, the tables turned, and regret burned deeper than the wax ever could. If you stand for protecting the innocent and demanding accountability, subscribe now. Together, we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of racism, cruelty, and the abuse of authority in everyday spaces. Its purpose is to raise awareness about discrimination, provoke thought about accountability, and inspire action toward justice, empathy, and human dignity.